Hello everybody, my name is Grace and today I'm going to read Chapter 4 of Who Was J.K Rowling. Chapter 4, First Draft. Jo and baby Jessica went to live in Edinburgh, Scotland. Jo's sister, Dee, was already living there with her husband. More than anything, Jo wanted to finish her book. Every time Jessica fell asleep, Jo pulled out her notes and wrote. Usually in coffee shops and cafes, she wrote as much as fast as she could. Because she didn't have a job yet, Jo lived on public assistance. This meant that the government sent a check each month for rent and food. Sometimes there was only enough money to buy food for Jessica, and Jo went hungry. While Jo was struggling to make ends meet, the government in England started a campaign called Back to Basics. It said that single mothers like Jo was something the country should be ashamed of. Jo vowed that if she had money to spare, she would use it to help women like her who had to take care of children on their own. Luckily, Jo had friends to help her. When she needed a place to write, she went to Nicholson's restaurant, where the owner, Dee's husband, let her sit for hours with Jessica. Jo's old friend, Sean, lent her money to get a flat with her friends, and family's encouragement. Jo finally finished Harry Potter and Philosopher's Stone. It was only a first draft. She knew she would have to make a lot of changes before it was good enough to be published. She shared it with Dee, who had always been the first to hear her stories. Dee loved it. Jo got a job as a French teacher. When she wasn't teaching, she spent her time working on her manuscript. She worked very hard. She wanted to make as good as it could be. Jo wrote and rewrote every chapter. Finally, 7 years after Jo first had the idea of Harry Potter, she was ready to show her book to the world. Chapter 5. The Slush Pile. Jo printed out the first 3 chapters and put them in a plastic cover. She sent them to an agent. If the agent liked the first 3 chapters, then Jo sent the rest of the book. An agent is a person who sells books to publishers for authors. Agents have the contracts at publishing companies. The beginning writers don't. The agent gets a part of whatever money the author makes. Jo knew that she had a much better chance of selling her book if she had an agent. Only a couple of days after she sent it, Jo received her manuscript back in the mail. The agent didn't want to read the rest of it. Could all her hard work have been for nothing? What if nobody wanted to read her story? But she had come so far, she couldn't imagine giving up. She looked for another agent. Then she found a man named Christopher Little. Jo had always loved names, especially liked his name because Little sounds like the name of the character in a children's book. Jo put her 3 chapters into an envelope again and waited. The manuscript landed in the slush pile at the agency where Christopher Little worked. A slush pile is a name for many books and stories that just arrived in the offices of agents and publishers. Nobody has asked to see them. The stories in a slush pile are almost always by beginners who haven't yet had a book published. Slush piles can be very large. Usually, Christopher wouldn't spend too much time going through the slush pile. One day, as he was heading out to meet someone for lunch, he picked up a story from the slush pile that other people in the office had liked. He took it with him to the restaurant. When his friend was late, he pulled out and started reading about a boy wizard. Little was quickly sucked into the world of Hogwarts. When he got back to the office, he sent Jo a letter. In it, he thanked her for sending the story and was eager to sell it. When Jo received the letter, she couldn't believe it. It was only 2 sentences long, but it was the greatest letter she ever received. Christopher Little sold Jo's book to Bloomsbury's publishers. She couldn't wait to tell her family, especially Dee, who had always loved Jo's stories more than anyone. With the money from the sale, Jo stopped teaching French and got right back to working on Harry Potter. She had big plans for her boy wizard. Chapter 6. Pottermania. After years of dreaming and years of hard work, Jo was going to be a published author. She still almost couldn't believe it. Then one evening, about a month later, she got more exciting news. Christopher Little told her that in the United States, the book was being sold in an auction. Jo was confused. Was it an auction just for paintings or jewelry or expensive pieces of furniture? At auctions, people called out prices that they were willing to pay for things. These offers were called bids. How could anyone be bidding on her story? Mr. Little explained that there were publishers in America that were so interested in Harry Potter. Very interested. So interested that they were competing with one another to buy it. Each publisher was trying to get on top of other bids, just like the auctions Jo knew. The price was up to 5 figures, he said. That meant over $10,000. 2 hours later, Mr. Little called back. The price was now up to 6 figures. That meant Jo's book would be sold over $100,000. The winner was Arthur Levine of Scholastic. He was a little scared about spending so much money on the first-time author, but he loved the book so much. He thought kids in America would too. His favorite thing about Harry Potter was the idea of growing up unappreciated, feeling outcast, and this great satisfaction of being discovered. Jo understood the feeling of being discovered. With her newfound wealth, she bought a new jacket. It was strange for Jo to be able to spend money on herself and not worry about it. In June 1997, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stones by J.K. Rowling was published in the United Kingdom. Bloomsbury had asked Jo if they could use her initials instead of her name on the book. They were worried that the boys might not want to read the book if it was written by a woman. Jo didn't have a middle name, so she gave herself one, Kathleen, after her grandmother. That's where the K in J.K. comes from. Bloomsbury didn't keep a secret of her being a woman for so long. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stones was a big hit. Jo's own daughter, Jessica, was only 4, too young to read the book, but other children loved it. Jo was voted the winner of Smarties Book Prize by schoolchildren all over the United Kingdom. They couldn't wait to finish and read her second book, which Jo had already finished, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It was published in July 1998. It was also becoming famous in America, where her book was called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Scholastic changed the title so everyone would know the book had magic in it. Americans and British people both speak English, but there are a lot of differences in the way they speak it. For American kids, some changes were made in the Harry Potter's book, including Scotch tape for sellotape, parking lot for car park, a bag of chips for a packet of crisps. This kind of Americanizing is done in many US editions of books that were published in the United Kingdom. In October 1998, Jo traveled to the United States for the first time for a 10-day book tour. At first, Jo was worried that American children wouldn't like her books, as much as in the United Kingdom did. But Jo was wrong. When I did public readings, she told the Scotsman's newspaper, they even all laughed in the same places as British youngsters. Jo was surprised that many of the children she met had already read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The book wasn't even published in the United States yet. They had ordered the book from England on the internet because they couldn't wait. Jo was more successful than ever dreamed. But things was just getting started. In the publishing world, no children's books had ever been as popular as Harry Potter books. Each book landed on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for so long. The newspaper started running a separate list for children's literature. Even popular children's books writers like Dr. Seuss, The Cat in the Hat, R.L. Stein, Goosebumps, and C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, did not sell as many books. By the time she returned to the United States to promote her third book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Jo was met by not just children, but crowds of adults. Why were there so many adults reading a book written for children? It's because a really good story appeals to people of all ages. It's called the Pottermania. That it meant that everyone was going crazy for Harry Potter. Jo's life had changed beyond her wildest dreams. She traveled around the world and stayed in the best hotels. She could buy clothes made by famous fashion designers. Once, while going to a movie premiere, she wore a pair of gold shoes. They had 6-inch heels and cost $1,000. What was happening to Jo was a little bit like what happens to Harry when he first arrives at Hogwarts. He's surprised to learn that he's famous. People he doesn't know want to be his friend. Harry often finds his names in the newspapers. Now Jo was in the papers too, and showed up on the radio, on TV. Reporters even showed up at her house. Perhaps some of the reporters she met influenced the way Jo wrote Rita Skeeter, a devious reporter who makes up stories about Harry. Jo didn't know that being an author would be like this. In an article of independent newspapers, she said, I imagined being a famous writer would be like being Jane Austen. Being able to sit at home in the parsonage and your books would be very famous. I never dreamed it would impact my daughter's life negatively, which at time it has. Now Jessica was 7 years old. She still hadn't read any of her mother's books. Jo thought that the Harry Potter books were for readers who are at least 8 years old. But Jessica could not stand being the only person at school who had never read them. So Jo read them to her, and she loved them. Jessica did not love having strangers snap her picture without asking if they could. Neither did her mother. On a vacation in the Galapagos Islands, a photographer took pictures of Jo in a bikini. Jo didn't like that either. Everyone wanted to know all about the Rowling's family. Jo, Jessica, Jo's new boyfriend, Dr. Neil Murray. A friend introduced Jo to Neil in 20,000. With his dark hair and glasses, Neil looked like a grown-up Harry Potter. When he started dating Jo, the press began snapping pictures of him too. Jo and Neil were planning a life together with Jessica. In 2001, they bought a 19th century mansion on the banks of the River Tay in Scotland. Besides having a morning room, a drawing room, and 162 acres of land, the house was close to Castle Menzies. Castle Menzies was about 500 years old. Many people think it looks a lot like Hogwarts. Jo loved her new life, but sometimes being famous was hard. Jo was by nature very private, and it was scary to feel like she was being spied on. She never had plans on being famous. In an interview, she said, "I never wanted it, and I never expected, and I certainly never worked for it. And I see it as something I have to get through, really." Pottermania was getting bigger and bigger. It was only a matter of time before Hollywood got in on the game. So that's all of chapter 4, 5, and 6, and I will see you next time. Bye!